come to a decision anytime soon when it comes to the matters of tariffs and whether or not they are even legal. So, something I find very interesting by this is that very little news coverage talking about whether or not this Supreme Court decision is going to have any kind of real impact on the economy. There's plenty of talk about it, debates about it, but very few news articles covering this particular topic. Now, when you go and you just search out through the Google search engines or whatever you want, just type in Supreme Court tariff decision and look for the news articles out there. Very few, very quiet. It's almost as if it's a media blackout. And then you go and you try and find the discussion that's being had about it and like what the impacts are really going to be. And again, it's very few people really giving it any kind of consideration, even though they know, right, deep down inside, that if those tariffs are deemed illegal, there's going to be an immediate action taken that is going to have like a game two plan that is initiated that essentially pretty much makes the idea of illegal tariffs a non-argument. Like nobody even cares anymore. But to me, this is a very, very important topic. In fact, it's probably the most important topic right now to discuss, and nobody really seems to care about it. So here on the Uneducated Economist, we're going to keep talking about it and what it really means. Because the more they push the delay, like they keep delaying this decision, so therefore the ability to keep issuing out the credible threat of tariffs continues for the administration. So as they continue to push the credible threat of tariffs into the future and believing that these tariffs are going to have, let me make sure the Wi-Fi is turned off here real quick. Yeah, it is. So as they push the credible threat of tariffs into the future and try to bully the nations around to make them behave in the way that the administration is hoping that they will, the reality of the situation is it very well could be that these things are not even allowed or legal or not possible. But look at all the actions that are taking place. That's the important part. This is the important part of understanding the credible threat theory, is that even though nothing has happened, action is taking place. And this is the important part. Because as they use the credible threat of just about anything out there, whether it's war or COVID or tariffs or whatever you want, criminal charges against an administration, it pushes a particular belief system out there onto the people. And then they start incorporating that into their decision-making process. Understanding how it is that they do this and the reasonings that they do it gives you a much different view of what it is that's taking place within the economy out there, especially when it comes to the inflation expectations. As many individuals believe that the Federal Reserve is looking to try and lower inflation down to a 2% target, this is probably one of the most inaccurate understandings that has been purposefully pushed out there for the people to then internalize, is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to get to a 2% target. This has never happened in the history of the Federal Reserve. Never once, not any time, have they ever been able to maintain a 2% inflation. They've seen 2% inflation as they've passed by it, either on the way up or on the way down, but never in their history have they ever been able to maintain a 2% inflation target. There is no reason to believe that they can do it going into the future. But yet 99% of the people out there believe that's exactly what the Federal Reserve is attempting to do. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so as I see the issues that are now taking place, especially with that of the Supreme Court, and how it is that the expectations of the people are being elevated with inflationary pressures, this is going to have a huge benefit to the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve. And I know many people will think, wow, this is crazy. This is backwards from what it is that everybody else is discussing out there, because literally nobody knows that the Federal Reserve is attempting to get to neutral when you have elevated inflation and a low R star. This is exactly what the environment would look like. Now, nobody knows this. I don't know why It's not like the Fed didn't say it. It's not like they didn't tell the people many times through their speeches and own documents that this is exactly what they were going to do and what the environment would look like if they were to have their wish list of opportunities coming into the future. This is what it would look like. And again, I don't know how many people realize it. Now, I have left down in the description a link to a course that I have developed, or developing, I should say, that gives you the opportunity to right now go and look at all the speeches that I have collected that form the credible threat theory. Now, there is a lot more documents than what it is that I have shared, but what it is that I have shared with you is by far the most important ones. If you can internalize the information that I have tried to share with the audience here, that I have now put together inside of a course that is for free for the next 24 hours, you can go download all those PDFs that I have highlighted so that you can look at those speeches and internalize that information for yourself, and then you would also recognize the need for elevated inflation and inflation expectations to save their policy. And what you witness out there within the administration and the powers that be and the mainstream media deployment of information is literally the monetary policy within itself. You view it from a distance. And when you see it, you recognize it, you wonder how it is that so many people could miss out on what it is that you now have for information. Literally less than 1% of the population knows what it is that I have shared. This is crazy to think, but it's the reality of the situation, and I have proof of it for you to go and read right now. Go and look at the link that I leave down in the description to the course. Go and check out the information. Do what you need to do with that information, with those speeches, with that highlighted talks that I have pinpointed down to show you exactly what it is that is going on within this monetary policy. I'm giving it to you for free for the next 24 hours. Over 170 people have already taken advantage of this. You wouldn't believe how many people have thanked me now, saying, man, this is it. This is what I needed. This is the stuff that I was looking for in order to understand what it is that you have been saying this whole time. It is so much more making sense when you share this information. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate those people for thanking me for that. Because knowing that this stuff is getting out there and that people are using it for their benefit to give them a better position in life for themselves, for their family, for their friends, that's what the goal is. That's what I am trying to do here. And I know that there's no way that I can help the people out there if I cannot take care of myself. So this course is going to go up for charge in 24 hours. Right now, you can take full advantage of it. You can take full advantage of the fact that it is free by following the link down in the description and becoming a member of the course program. Get that information as much as you can retain in the next 24 hours, and then after that, consider becoming a member and becoming a monthly member of the course, where we will break this stuff down regularly, where we will share the information that we have collected over the years and then deploy that information into the current environment so that we have a better understanding of what's going on. We are going to have a discussion about that so that we can position ourselves better for it. So I think about some of the things that are happening right now, especially that when it comes to the pushing of the idea of what it is that's happening in the future. And those tariffs are the biggest credible threat I have ever could possibly imagine coming right now, that seems to be constantly deployed, hinging on a decision coming from the Supreme Court, who keeps delaying it over and over again. Man, talk about pushing the power into the pendulum of tariff propaganda, inflationary pressures. It works perfect. All right. 10 minutes into the stream, what else do we want to talk about? Hit the like button on the way into the stream, please, everybody, because that will make YouTube share it more widely so we get more interesting questions in here. Thank you so much, Brody. I really appreciate it. Hey, everyone. Yo. Okay. Wow, there ain't nobody commenting here. What's going on? All right, live chats. There we go. We got Dishes up in the house. Hey, guys, hit the like button. Thank you so much, Dishes. Really appreciate the comment. All right, the Japanese are dumping treasuries, raising rates, and their yen does not recover. What does that mean for the king dollar destroying everything? Well, I mean, it just kind of goes to show that the dollar is by far the only currency that is really out there that is ever going to have any kind of ability to serve as a world reserve currency, considering what it is that the United States is doing. I understand there are many nations out there who are dumping out of treasuries. They are getting out, right? All the idea of BRICS nations and de-dollarization and all this other stuff, they're dumping out of the dollars. Go and look for yourself. Just Google it and do the research. How much foreign holdings of U.S. debt now comparatively to the past? There is more holdings of U.S. debt by foreign investors now than ever. Of course, there's so much debt to be had. That's probably one of the reasons why they hold so much. But it doesn't change the fact that there is more held now than there ever has been. Right? There are nations out there who are trying to get out of it, but then you think about it, what is it that they're really trying to do when they're getting out of dollars or out of treasuries? Are they really trying to get out of treasuries, or are they trying to get into dollars? Because the fastest way to get dollars is to sell your treasury debt. Right? You sell the treasuries, almost instantaneous liquidity into dollars. Now you have dollars to pay your debts or do transactions or whatever it is you got going on out there. So if you have an economy that is slowing down and you have debt to pay and you can't find the money out there, what's the easiest way to get dollars? Sell U.S. treasuries. Okay. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Well, thank you. Happy Tuesday to you as well. Does that mean dollar will be the only one left? No, I don't think it's going to be the only one left. I'm just saying that there's nothing else that's going to compete against it. In fact, the idea of BRICS nations stepping up with their own sovereign nation's currency in order to do like international transactions is a benefit to the Federal Reserve. I don't know how many people realize that. The Federal Reserve is obligated, in a sense, to provide the world with the dollars. How do they do that? They got to buy U.S. Treasury debts in order to create the liquidity to provide to the world. That sends the United States government on an unsustainable debt path. Then what happens? Now, the Federal Reserve is stuck in a position in which they can either send the United States into an unsustainable debt path or deny the world the ability to do transactions in dollars because they're not going to be able to provide them with enough liquidity to do it. I know this sounds crazy for a lot of people, but this is the reality of the situation. And so now when we think about what it is that the Federal Reserve can do, I left, again, down in the description, a link to the courses that describe exactly what it is that can happen. And Ben Bernanke addressed that very issue literally 20 plus years ago. In the speech, Deflation and How to Prevent It from Ever Occurring here, he addresses that very situation and that the Federal Reserve could buy the debt of a foreign nation. Can you imagine that? Like buying the sovereign debt of a European nation, putting it on the Fed's balance sheet and issuing out dollars, or at least Federal Reserve liabilities, whatever that means, right? At that time, I mean, who knows what the decision could be like. If that's a real thing coming into the future, how many people are talking about that? None, zero, nobody, right? Just the uneducated economists, because we constantly review the Fed's own words and then use them against them. Doing well, coming up on 2 years and working toward another. All right, cash rules everything around me. All right, I want inflation. It's about time my property is worth something compared to Europe and the rest of the world. Credible threat of war has been made. Building up some real estate as well as still stacking. Yeah. Wow, this is crazy. They grow up too fast sometimes, man, don't they? China tariffs work so well. Let's try Europe tariffs. Yeah, and it's, what's funny about it is if you think about this in that sense of how is it that the United States gets the dollars out there to the rest of the world. This is Triffin's dilemma. See, this is another thing that a lot of people don't really take into consideration is Triffin's dilemma. This is something that they came up with back in the 60s. They recognized what was going on. And that is as the world as the world demands dollars to do world transactions with, that increases the demand for dollars. Now, as the transactions of the world start to pick up, as growth starts to happen, the the demand for more dollars takes place, right? And so if you have more demand for dollars, that starts to strengthen the dollar. Well, that's a problem for the United States because the few exports that we do have, which is actually quite a bit, right? We do export a lot of stuff. The problem is that we import more than we export. But anyway, our exports, the ones that we do have, as the dollar strengthens, diminishes because the foreign buyers can't buy as much of our stuff as the dollar strengthens, right? So now this is an issue. Like, they recognized this a long time ago. Like I said, way back in the 60s, this was an obvious thing to them. And that they realized that if there was a demand for dollars outside of the United States that intensified, that would destroy, right, essentially destroy the manufacturing exporters of the United States. So, now, to understand what it is that needs to happen there is that dollars need to be exported out of the United States to meet the demand of the world to do the world transactions with. In order to get those dollars out there to the world, it becomes a very difficult task. You can literally hand it to them, which doesn't work out too well, do these currency swaps. There's a few things that can go about trying to get the dollars out there. Export of money by importing stuff is by far the most efficient way of doing it, right? So you have to run trade deficits. If you run trade deficits, you can export the dollars by importing the stuff. Now, if you export the dollars, you can meet the demand for dollars outside of the United States by getting those dollars out there by buying all the people's stuff. These trade deficits is a major problem when it comes to ever increasing amounts of money pouring into the system and separation of the rich and the poor. See, high quality, good manufacturing jobs from producing, saving nations builds the middle class. When you are a debtor consumer nation, you will separate the classes. And this is the unfortunate situation we now face. Again, this is all stuff that you can learn, from following the Uneducated Economist and the speeches that we cover and all the stuff that we do. But again, like most of this stuff, you're going to be able to find within the documents that I left down in the description to the link to the courses that we are putting together and have for free for the next 24 hours. Again, after 24 hours, it's going to be a paywall attached to it. I hope you all consider joining in on the Uneducated Economist, UE University, to get a better understanding of monetary policy from a working class point of view in order to conduct yourself in a more appropriate fashion for a better position for you and your family. This is how we do it. Right? We have the conversation about it. We break this stuff down regularly. We try to internalize it from a working class point of view. And although a lot of this stuff has a language all its own to it, again, we try to share what it is that we can do as an individual to position ourselves most appropriately. And most of that just comes from knowledge. Knowledge is power. Simon, I intended to make a purchase in Astoria and throw my weight around the area. I will ensure that all your outstanding traffic infractions are taken care of. Well, I appreciate that. All right. Thank you to whoever sent me a membership yesterday. Right on. Well, that was cool. Thank you for joining the channel. We got a membership to the channel as well. And I got memberships all over the place. You're going to be a Patreon member, a YouTube member, join the course member. I got all kinds of memberships out there. But they're all a little different from each other. And the idea that the membership for the YouTube channel, it talks about the most updated speeches that have been essentially coming from the Federal Reserve that I feel are important for monetary policy. There was a recent one from Myron that I think we should cover. Those are what I have pretty much used the YouTube membership for, is delivering those most recent speeches. The Patreon is to go back over the old speeches and just kind of rehash them over and over again. Has a place to kind of put my thoughts. I'll sometimes type up an article and I'll put those things on Patreon. The course, this is different. This is directed absolutely towards the credible threat theory in itself and the documents that I have used to develop the credible threat theory. There's really, I'm not bringing in like the lumber industry. I might bring in a little bit of lumber news, but this is mainly focused in on just the credible threat theory, the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, the secret one, not the one that everybody wants to talk about and says that they screwed up. This is the one that they had applied and got exactly the way they wanted. And I know a lot of people are going to miss that because it's not communicated that way by anybody out there. But once you break down the information, once you have seen it through the credible threat theory, it becomes very obvious. I mean, it becomes incredibly obvious this is what they're up to. And it's all about raising that inflation expectation, again, to raise the neutral interest rate. Getting that neutral interest rate up off the lower bound of zero gives them the ability to then use interest rate adjustments to actually mess with the economy, right? Typically, lowering interest rates to stimulate the economy is not possible if they're operating at the lower bound of zero. So the only way to get off of zero is to have elevated inflation and inflation expectations persistently. And again, this is coming from John Williams. All the speeches are there. He said it. The goal, the problem we need to solve, that's what he said. The problem we need to solve these days is a risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high, meaning just 2018, when he delivered that speech, the end of 2018, what they were looking for in the future was elevated inflation that was persistently too high. Bang! Man, did they not get it. Once you see why, once you see how, once you get that image and know what it is that they were looking for, shooting for, and got delivered to them, all the rest of the stuff, it only lends credibility to the credible threat theory, right? It just, everything starts lining up and making sense. You know, nothing makes sense otherwise. It all just like, it seems very confusing, and you know, I don't know, like I don't even know how to describe it. It just becomes like to the point that people like start making up and become very conspiratorial in their ideas of what it is that's happening out there. But then when you see it from the credible threat theory and the monetary policy, it's like, well, this elevates the inflation expectation. It totally makes sense, you know. All right. If we get Greenland, can we get its socialism? It reached 160 and still going up. Nice. All right. Deja vu up in the house. Thanks, Huey and everyone. Right on. Great to see you here, Deja. All righty. What time is it? I got a few more minutes here. Okay, Simon, how will Trump's credible threat of war with NATO impact the economy? Okay, so in my opinion, what I am looking for when it comes to the credible threat theory is the elevated inflation or inflation expectations, or the decreasing of that one way or the other. Now, sorry, there's a bunch of cops over there. I'm wondering what they're up to. Huh. Anyway, so when it comes to the credible threat and the credible threat of war, right? Like, what is it that you believe would happen if there was a war to break out? Like, that would be very concerning, right? Most likely, you would see a lot of people moving into a safe haven position when that happens. Now, you're seeing gold, you're seeing these other things taken off. Now, usually it's U.S. Treasuries that people are getting into, but right now you're seeing something very different kind of happening with the idea of what's happening inside of Treasuries, people dumping out of them, right? So kind of opposite. Now, if the credible threat of war becomes very real, I would only assume that people are going to get very nervous and they are going to dump out of everything they have to get into the safest thing possible. And if the real credible threat of war is taking place and the United States is engaging in it, they are going to side with the United States. What's going to happen to the U.S. Treasury debt? Right? So again, this is very credible in the sense of what could happen, but what actually happens when the war breaks out could be very different from what it is that people are positioning themselves in with the credibility of war and the idea of it, as opposed to the actual implementation of that war. Okay? So people jump all over the place, they make these snap decisions, and then all of a sudden you see the credible threat of war go away. Well, then all of a sudden now they have to go back and revert to where they were. Well, if you have a real war breakout and it's actually taking place, they don't revert back to the way they were. Right? So the credible threat has to be pushed through in order for it to be sustaining. Otherwise, it's just going to have a short-term impact until the threat fades away. What would you do if war broke out? Think about it in that sense. Would you want to be investing into the Dow if war broke out, or would you be investing into a safe haven? Would you be considering like buying into building a rental property if war was breaking out, or would you most likely probably be holding back and getting into a cash position thinking that most people are probably going to end up selling off their assets? I mean, it's up to you, and everybody has to make a different decision. Now, most of the time when you look back on history and you think about what it is that's taken place when war breaks out, most of the time people jump into treasuries. That's usually the case. And I don't see any other nation out there that's going to be providing a safe and liquid asset like the U.S. Treasury debt. That leaves pretty much gold and Bitcoin to a much lesser extent. I will get in my car and drive as fast as possible. Leif Erikson mode. You can't really drive that fast on Leif Erikson. Well, I mean, I guess there's some spots. You know. I find it fishy, no Supreme Court ruling yet on tariffs. Well, I do find it fishy too, but then again, I also just immediately just step back and say, okay, well, what is this going to mean for the economy? What is the people's behaviors? They literally have coming to like Supreme Court decision fatigue. Like they don't even care about it anymore. Right? They're just assuming that they're not going to decide on it, and that Trump is just going to be able to have his way for the rest of his term. And I'm assuming that's what people are thinking at this point, because there's literally no articles, like very few articles talking about the tariff decision. But what does this do for the credible threat theory, right? The credible threat of tariffs is very much pronounced and very much pushed, and that you see everywhere on the news. Huh. Well, I know that they're using the news as propaganda tool. Right? That they don't want you talking about the Supreme Court tariffs, they won't have you talking about the Supreme Court tariffs. They'll have you talking about tariffs of 200% on some other nation out there because they're not following in line with the idea of taking over Greenland. All of that is credible threats. None of that is like brought to reality. You see what I'm getting at here? So the Supreme Court can make a real decision on this, and they don't, so now we have to go off of the credible threat that it's real, because they just simply won't make the decision on it. It works. So it works. Like if you wanted the ability to use your words to inflict massive amounts of power around, this is a wonderful way of doing it. All right, nothing new under the sun, Maverick. Don't be sensational. The Fed expectations to cut interest rates is driving inflation expectations. That is a significant driver of actual inflation, driving silver up with it. See, here's the thing, though. If this is the case, if the people have taken in the perception that there is going to be a lowering of interest rates, driving up of inflation, what this will do, right, is it will start to raise the inflation expectation, and then the Federal Reserve will not be able to lower rates because they're trying to get to neutral. That would raise the inflation. That would raise the inflation would raise the neutral interest rate and literally position the Fed at neutral, with the idea that there's going to be inflation expectations from the lowering of interest rates. You see how this works? It actually makes the economy far less restricted when you have elevated inflation and inflation expectations. And this is so funny because I keep bringing this up and nobody wants to believe me. But I mean, I'm sure some people want to believe me. Some people are very confused by that idea. That's how I should say it. And it's not that they don't want to believe me, they just don't get it. But yet again, right? I have shared down in the description a link to the course that has within it the speech, Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. And now in that speech, right, straight up, let me see if I can bring it up here again real quick. Okay. In that speech, straight up, he says this. Gotta get my glasses. All right. Okay. Due to this shortfall may. Okay. Okay. Here we go. The downward shift in inflation expectations. This is a problem, right? So think about this. The downward shift in inflation expectation has a second round effect on real interest rates, the economy, and inflation. So inflation expectation has a second round effect on interest rates, the real interest rates, the economy, and inflation. When policy is constrained by the effective lower bound, the downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates. Did you guys get that? The downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates. Raises the real interest rates, further diminishing the degree of monetary stimulus, right? This diminishes the degree of monetary stimulus, making the downturn worse and reducing inflation even more. So now let's read this opposite, okay? Because this gets confusing. The downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates, right? Putting downward shift on inflation expectation, further diminishing the degree of monetary stimulus and making the downturn worse. Now, what is happening here is, if you can imagine being an investor who is going to get a 2% return on your investment, and then you have an inflation expectation of 1%. The real interest rate is now 1%, what you are going to get after inflation. If you lower the inflation expectation to 0, you will raise the real interest rate to 2%, what it is that the investor believes that they are going to get after inflation. Lowering the inflation expectation raises the real interest rates. You see how that happened? Now, it works opposite. If you raise the inflation expectation, you will lower the real interest rates. Bang. Raising the inflation expectation lowers the real interest rates. It makes the economy more stimulated, and increases inflation even more. Crazy to think. Completely opposite of what it is that most people would ever consider out there. But this is coming directly from John Williams, New York Fed president, voting member of the FOMC. You can say whatever you want about it. Nobody's communicating this. Let me read it to you one more time so it's clear. When policy is constrained by the effective lower bound, the downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates, further diminishing the degree of monetary stimulus and making the downturn worse and reducing inflation even more. Now, to understand how that is a problem, you're going to have to go down into the description of this video and become a member of the course. When you become a member of the course, you will have access to this speech and all the highlighted marks that I have put on that speech that show you exactly how monetary policy was suffering the consequences of a too low inflation and inflation expectation that was interfering with their monetary policy. Now that they have elevated inflation and innate inflation expectation, they are now got the monetary policy that they were looking for. Monetary policy that was persistently too high. This is exactly what he wanted. John Williams said it right here, right? Oops. He said it. Today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate, that is, the short-term real interest rate, consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is a risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. You think about it, if the monetary policy collapses, the entire nation, government, and all that stuff collapses too, including the Supreme Court. This is self-preservation taking place at the finest, highest levels. And once you recognize that's what it is, you're seeing how it is that they inflict pain and suffering on the people in order to maintain this system. Elevated inflation and inflation expectation, separating the rich from the poor, the top 20% of the consumers, and everybody else's job sucks. Unfortunate, but this is the situation we now face. You want to do something about it, you're going to have to get the knowledge. You're going to have to understand what it is that the Federal Reserve is facing, how it is that the administration is benefiting them, how it is that the Supreme Court is definitely in line with this idea, and what it is that you need to do about it. And the only way to do that is to understand it from the credible threat theory. And again, the course is down in the description of this video. You have 24 hours. 24 hours to get that information. It's all there. Okay? After 24 hours, we're going to start hashing that stuff out, breaking it down for the individuals who want to really internalize this stuff through a conversation with other people who are also in the same position, who want to have a better life, knowing that this economy, that this system is not coming for them. There's nobody out there who's going to show up. And if you don't take control of this now, you will be left behind. I think we should call it there. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.